The twin moons of Varkas hung low on the horizon, bleeding silver light across the marble floors of Baron Thrix's great hall. The alien noble sat upon a throne of black crystal, his long, jointed fingers drumming a slow rhythm against the armrest. His court, a mix of armored retainers, jeweled merchants, and sycophants, stood in careful semicircles, their voices hushed. Elias Vance stood before him, flanked by two towering guards. He had faced plasma fire, vacuum breaches, and the black cold of space, but nothing about the Baron's gaze felt like anything he could prepare for. Thrix's eyes were multifaceted, like a predator's, reflecting 1,000 tiny images of the human officer standing before him. The summons had been unexpected. 2 weeks earlier, Elias had led a daring rescue of an alien warship trapped in the unstable gravity well of a collapsing star. It wasn't his duty, strictly speaking. The ship belonged to a rival empire, but there had been civilians aboard, and that was enough. Humans had a habit of saving lives, even those of their enemies. The Baron's voice rasped like steel on stone. "Command Vance, you have rendered assistance to the House of Thrix." Elias inclined his head. "I did what I could, my lord. Lives were at stake." A ripple of amusement moved through the gathered courtiers, though Elias couldn't guess at the joke. The Baron's smile was thin, calculated. "And so, a reward, a gift most personal." Two guards emerged from a side passage, pushing a slender silver-wheeled chair. Seated within was a young woman, alien but strikingly humanoid. Her hair was a pale shimmer like molten metal, falling in sheets over her shoulders. Her skin held a faint opalescent sheen, but it was her eyes, gray with flecks of blue, that caught Elias's attention, sharp and defiant, despite the stillness of her body from the waist down. The Baron continued, "This is my daughter, Lyra." Elias's jaw tightened. He wasn't sure what reaction the court expected, shock, gratitude, confusion, but he felt the weight of every gaze upon him. Lyra's expression did not change. If anything, she seemed to be daring him to reject her. "A daughter," Elias said slowly, "is not a thing to be given." The Baron leaned forward. "Consider it a symbol of goodwill. She will be your companion, your burden, perhaps your amusement." The last word was drawn out, dripping with derision. Laughter rippled through the hall, polished, cruel laughter that seemed to echo far longer than it should have. Elias understood then. This wasn't a gift. This was an insult, a reminder of what the Baron thought of human charity. In alien aristocratic culture, to saddle a warrior with a dependent was to mock his strength, an anchor for the one who fancied himself a rescuer. He could have refused, should have refused, but as his eyes met Lyra's, something shifted. She didn't look ashamed, she didn't look broken, she looked angry, and that anger wasn't directed at him. Elias straightened his posture. "Then I accept your gift," he said, his voice steady, "and I will treat her with the respect owed to a life saved, not a prize handed over." The Baron's eyes narrowed, the thin smile fading for just an instant. Around them, the courtiers whispered, confused, intrigued. Elias stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the back of Lyra's chair. "Come on," he murmured quietly enough that only she could hear. She didn't answer, but the smallest flicker of surprise crossed her features. As they turned to leave, Elias felt the heat of 100 stares burning into his back. This was not the end of the Baron's insult. It was the beginning of something entirely new. And in that moment, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Baron had made a mistake. The Baron's palace fell away behind them, swallowed by the endless darkness of space. Elias guided the shuttle toward his long-range corvette, resolute, keeping his eyes on the navigation readouts. Beside him, in the co-pilot's seat, Lyra sat in silence, her hands resting in her lap. She hadn't spoken a word since they'd left the great hall. Elias tried not to notice how rigid she sat, her jaw tight, her gaze fixed on the stars sliding past the viewport. She radiated an almost tangible wall of distance, one he knew better than to push against. When the shuttle's docking clamps engaged, he stood, moving to unlock the rear hatch. "We'll be on the Resolute in a moment," he said, his tone neutral. "Your quarters will be private. You'll have control over your own door codes and—" "You don't need to pretend," she said, suddenly, her voice clear and sharp. He turned. Her eyes were on him now, cold and assessing. "Pretend what?" "That this is anything other than a humiliation for you. I know what my father intended. I know what you must think." Elias met her gaze evenly. "I think you're a passenger on my ship. That's all that matters right now." Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "A passenger. That's a polite word for a burden." He didn't flinch. "You'll find I'm not in the habit of treating people like cargo." For a heartbeat, she seemed ready to argue, but instead, she looked away. The wall was back up. Life aboard the Resolute fell into a strange rhythm over the next several days. Lyra kept to her quarters most of the time, requesting meals through the ship's system rather than joining the crew in the mess. Elias respected her distance, but he noticed things, small things, that didn't fit. Once, while passing her open doorway, he heard her speaking softly to herself, though no comm was active. Another time, during a routine course correction, she appeared on the bridge without having been summoned. "You were about to hit a gravitational shear," he said flatly. "It would have destabilized the starboard shields." She turned and wheeled herself out before he could respond. Elias checked the nav logs later. She had been right, down to the exact second the shear would have struck. The crew began to notice too. Engineer Cho swore she had seen Lyra in the engine bay minutes before a cooling unit failed, warning them to check the stabilizers. No one knew how she could possibly have known that. When Elias asked her about it one evening, she gave a simple answer: "I pay attention." And that was all. One night, while most of the crew slept, Elias found himself on the observation deck. He wasn't surprised to find Lyra there, her chair parked near the wide arc of glass, the Milky Way spilling its light across her face. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "I don't sleep much," she replied, without looking at him. "It's easier to think when the ship is quiet." He stepped beside her, hands clasped behind his back. "You seem to notice things other people miss." "That's one way of putting it," she replied, a faint glimmer of amusement touching her eyes. He studied her profile for a moment, the tension in her shoulders, the deliberate stillness of her hands. "I'm not here to pity you, Lyra, and I'm not afraid of what I don't understand. If you want to talk about it, about what's really going on, I'll listen." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she turned her head just enough to meet his gaze. "Be careful what you ask for, Commander. You might find the answer unsettling." And before he could say another word, she turned back to the stars, leaving him with the uneasy sense that she was far more than the Baron's cruel joke, and that whatever she was, it could change everything.
The Resolute drifted along the border lanes, its hull lit faintly by the red glow of a nearby nebula. Elias had been reviewing crew rotations when the alert chimed, an encrypted transmission flagged with the highest priority. The sender's ID was one he recognized from his days in the diplomatic corps. The message contained only 3 lines. "The Baron did not give you a gift. You were given a target. Watch the shadows." Elias read it twice before locking the file under his personal encryption. He sat back, frowning. In alien noble circles, favors and punishments often looked the same on the surface, but the tone of this message carried a weight he couldn't ignore. That evening, he found Lyra in the galley, a mug of tea resting on the table beside her. It was one of the rare times she had chosen to share a space with the crew, though the mess was nearly empty at this hour. "You don't seem surprised to see me," Elias said, pulling out a chair. "She heard you coming," she replied, not looking up from her tea. "Your right boot squeaks when you shift your weight." He studied her. "You notice everything, don't you?" She gave a faint shrug. "It's hard not to when you're always sitting still. The world moves around you. You either ignore it or you learn to read it." He hesitated, then decided to press forward. "Lyra, is there something you haven't told me? Something about why your father—" Her gaze snapped to his, sharp and unflinching. "You think this is just about my legs?" "I think your father is not the kind of man to give anything away without a reason," Elias said carefully, "and I just received a message suggesting that reason might involve danger." She sipped her tea, considering his words. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "I wasn't born like this. I could walk once. I could run. My father thought I could be more, stronger, faster, more useful. He paid for a genetic enhancement procedure banned in most systems. It failed." Elias felt a knot form in his stomach. Failed how? Her lips curved in a bitter half-smile. "I lost the use of my legs, but something else happened. My senses changed. I started feeling things, people's moods, their intentions, sometimes before they acted. My father called it a defect. I call it surviving his arrogance." Elias leaned back, absorbing her words. "So you can read people?" "It's not reading," she said, shaking her head. "It's like knowing. I don't hear thoughts, if that's what you're wondering. I feel currents, like tides pulling toward an outcome, and right now I feel yours shifting." He didn't deny it. "Because I think your father sent you to me not as an insult, but as bait, and if that's true, then someone is coming for you or for both of us." For a long moment, they held each other's gaze. Then Lyra said quietly, "If that's the case, I hope you're as good at surviving as your record says you are." Hours later, Elias stood alone in his quarters, staring at the encrypted warning again. His instincts told him the message was only the beginning. Out beyond the nebula, in the silent dark, ships could hide for days, weeks, waiting for their moment to strike. And if Lyra was right about her abilities, then the only advantage they might have was her. Somewhere deep in his chest, Elias felt the first flicker of something he hadn't expected, not fear, but determination. Whatever the Baron's true game was, Elias intended to make sure the last move would be his.
The Resolute was running silent, its drives set to low burn as it skirted the edge of an uncharted asteroid field. The nebula's crimson haze had faded, leaving only the cold clarity of deep space. Elias stood on the bridge, eyes scanning the tactical display. Nothing. No pings. No chatter on the open bands. Still, his skin prickled. Lyra's voice broke the quiet. "We should change course." He turned toward her. She had wheeled herself onto the bridge without a sound, her eyes fixed on the forward viewport. "There's nothing on sensors," Elias said. She didn't blink. "They're out there." "How do you know?" Her jaw tightened. "The same way I knew about the shears in the last system. I can feel them closing in, like pressure in the air before a storm." Elias's instincts warred with the cold logic of his training. He'd trusted gut feelings before, but this wasn't his gut, it was hers. And yet, she'd been right every time so far. "Helm," he said, "alter course by 20 degrees, evasive pattern Delta 7. Bring the drives to combat power." The crew didn't question him. They'd learned quickly that when the passenger spoke, it paid to listen. It happened fast.
The first shot was a needle of green light, slicing past the port bow close enough to heat the plating. The ship's alarms blared, filling the bridge with flashing red. "Contact! 3 ships, closing fast!" shouted the tactical officer. "Configuration matches Varkas Mercenary Guild signatures." "Shields up," Elias ordered. "Helm, get us into the field. Use the rocks for cover." The Resolute dove toward the asteroid cluster, twisting between jagged, tumbling stones the size of city blocks. The mercenary ships fanned out, herding them inward. "They're trying to box us in," the tactical officer said. "They won't," Elias replied. Lyra's voice cut through the chaos. "The one on the left, its pilot's about to swing wide to get behind us. If you cut under the big asteroid ahead and roll starboard, you'll shake him." Elias didn't hesitate. "Helm, do it." The Resolute banked hard, diving under a shadowed chunk of rock, then twisting sharply to the right. A burst of cannon fire from their pursuers splashed harmlessly against the asteroid's surface. "How did you—" the helm officer began. "She told you how," Elias said. "Keep listening." For the next 10 minutes, the Resolute became a phantom among the rocks, moving just ahead of enemy fire. Lyra's voice came in short, precise bursts, where they would come from, when they would fire, how they would try to flank. By the time the mercenaries realized they weren't herding prey, but chasing ghosts, the Resolute had slipped past the outer edge of the asteroid field. "Targets falling back," Tactical reported. "They've lost us." The bridge was quiet except for the faint hum of the engines. Lyra sat perfectly still, her breathing steady. Elias studied her for a moment before speaking. "You just saved this ship." She didn't look at him. "I only delayed what's coming. They'll try again. They're being paid too much not to." "Maybe," he said. "But next time they'll know you're not the easy target your father wanted them to think you are." Her eyes flicked toward him then, and for the first time since they'd met, there was no trace of mockery or guarded coldness, only something measured and searching. "Maybe you're not the kind of man I thought you were either," she said quietly. Elias allowed himself a faint smile. "We'll just have to keep surprising each other." Outside, the asteroid field spun slowly into darkness. Somewhere beyond it, the mercenaries were regrouping, but Elias felt something new in the air, between him and Lyra, and maybe even across the entire crew. A sense that survival was no longer a question of luck. It was a question of them.
The asteroid field faded into the dark behind them, but the Resolute hadn't escaped unscathed. The portside engine housing was venting coolant, and the starboard stabilizers were running hot enough to trip emergency safeties. They needed a place to hide, and fast. Elias found it on the fringe of the navigation charts, a derelict mining station abandoned decades ago when the asteroid belt's veins of ore dried up. It hung in space like a skeleton, its docking spines bent, hull plating flaking away under the constant whisper of micrometeors. The Resolute slid into the shadow of the structure, thrusters firing in short, careful bursts until the docking clamps caught with a deep metallic groan. Inside, the station smelled of stale air and cold metal. Gravity was weak, humming irregularly from what was left of the reactor. The corridors were lit only by emergency strips that flickered like tired eyes. "We'll need to run repairs from here," Elias told the crew. "Keep the ship's core systems cold. We don't want to give away our position with a power spike." Lyra followed him into the main operations deck of the station. Her hands rested on the controls of her chair, but her eyes scanned the dark corners like she could feel the memory of the place. "This station," she said softly, "it's quiet, but not peaceful. People left here in a hurry." Elias glanced at her. "You can tell that?" She nodded, her gaze unfocused. "It's in the air. The walls remember." He didn't press further. They set up a small hab area inside the station's control room, 2 bedrolls, a portable heater, ration packs. The rest of the crew stayed aboard the Resolute, working to patch the damage. Out here, it was just the 2 of them. Elias was working on a diagnostic console when he noticed Lyra shivering faintly in her chair. Without a word, he shrugged out of his ship jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She looked at him in surprise. "You don't have to." It's cold," he said simply. Her expression softened for just a moment before she masked it again. "You're not like most of his kind," she murmured. "My kind?" "Humans," she said, glancing toward him. "You give without calculating the return. It makes you dangerous in ways you don't even see." Elias considered that. Or maybe it just makes us stubborn. Hours later, while they were eating in the dim light, Lyra spoke again, her voice quieter than before. "Do you ever think about what it means if you can't do the things you once could?" Elias set his ration tin aside. "I've had injuries, been grounded before. It's not easy, but I've never believed a person's worth is tied to their mobility or their combat record." She let out a short, almost bitter laugh. "Easy to say when you can still walk." "I mean it," Elias said, leaning forward. "Worth isn't measured in the parts that work. It's measured in what you do with what's left." Her gaze locked with his, searching for the lie. She didn't find one. That night, though night was just a dimming of the emergency lights, Elias woke to find her still awake, watching the viewport. The pale glow from the distant stars cast silver across her face, making her seem both fragile and impossibly strong. "You're going to get us through this," she said softly, not quite looking at him. "We're going to get us through this," he corrected. For the first time, she smiled, a small, unguarded thing that felt like the first crack in the walls she kept around herself. Outside, the mining station drifted in the silence of space. Inside, between the creak of old metal and the hum of failing systems, something else was beginning to take root. Not trust, not yet, but something that might grow into it.
The derelict station creaked around them, the sound of its ancient frame settling in the cold of deep space. The Resolute was still half dismantled in the docking bay, its damaged systems laid bare under the hands of Elias's crew. Elias had spent the morning running supply inventories, but when he returned to the control room, he found Lyra in an unusual position. She'd moved her chair to the center of the deck and had her eyes closed, her hands resting lightly on the armrests. The faint hum of the station's life support system seemed to deepen around her, like a sound you could feel in your bones. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Listening," she said, not opening her eyes. "To what?" "Everything." Elias leaned against the wall, watching her. She stayed like that for several long seconds before finally opening her eyes. "I can feel the patterns here," she said quietly. "The reactor hum, the air recyclers, the way the hull flexes when the asteroid's pull shifts. But it's more than sound. It's like the station itself is breathing, and I can feel its pulse." Elias crossed the room. "You could already sense people's intentions. Now you're sensing machines?" She hesitated. "Not exactly. It's like the people who built it left an imprint. Their work, their mistakes. It's still here, like fingerprints you can't see but can feel if you know how." He studied her, weighing the strangeness of her words against what he'd already seen her do. "Have you tried focusing on a person instead? Seeing how deep it goes?" Her gaze flicked to him, guarded. "You're volunteering? Why not? If it helps you understand this gift?" Lyra's expression tightened slightly, but she nodded. "Close your eyes." Elias obeyed, listening to the quiet hum of the deck beneath his boots. A moment later, he felt something. Not a touch exactly, but a shift, like the air between them had grown heavier. "You're carrying tension in your shoulders," she murmured. "You've been replaying something in your mind, probably the attack, but it's not fear.
It's calculation. You're trying to see all the angles before they appear. Elias opened his eyes. Not bad. Her lips quirked. I'm better when people aren't expecting it. They began to practice daily, in the small hours when the station felt like it belonged only to them. Lyra pushed herself to reach farther, to catch the subtle shifts that preceded a decision, the tiny currents of emotion that hinted at intent. One night, she startled upright in her chair. Someone's coming. Elias was instantly alert. You feel them? They're still far, hours away, but their focus is sharp. It's predatory. Her voice tightened. It's the same kind of presence I felt from the mercenaries. Elias's jaw set. The warning from the encrypted message echoed in his mind. You were given a target. How many? I don't know, but they're hunting. Later, as they reviewed the station's schematics for possible defenses, Lyra glanced at him across the table. If they find us, you'll fight. I can feel that. But part of you is afraid for me. He didn't deny it. That's not a weakness. She tilted her head. No, it's not. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the silence between them thick with something unspoken. Elias had faced down hostile fleets, but the pull in her gaze was a different kind of danger, one he wasn't sure he wanted to resist. Outside, the dead station floated on in silence. Inside, Lyra's strange, growing awareness had just given them the smallest sliver of time before the storm arrived.
The station's long-range sensors had been half dead when they arrived, but Elias had coaxed enough life from them to detect the incoming signatures. 3 ships, closing fast, their emissions masked by the asteroid belt's background noise. Whoever was coming knew how to stalk prey. Lyra sat beside him in the control room, eyes closed, her breathing measured. They're coming in from different angles, she murmured. One is impatient. He'll break formation early to try and force a kill. The other 2 will hang back, driving us toward him. Elias nodded, absorbing the intel. If they want to hurt us, we don't run. We make them think we are and then cut them off. Her eyes opened. The station's docking arms. They're old, but the clamps are still functional. Elias followed her thinking instantly. We lure one inside and lock him down before the others know what's happening. You'll only get one chance, she warned. Then we make it count. They moved quickly. The crew of the Resolute powered down non-essential systems, making the station look like little more than a cold, drifting relic. Elias positioned the Corvette in the shadow of the station's central hub, ready to fire the moment the trap was sprung. Lyra remained in the operations deck, feeding him real-time reads on the attacker's intentions. Impatient one's moving in. You've got less than 60 seconds before he's at the bay doors. Elias keyed the comm. Docking control, open bay 3. Make it look like a leak in the airlock seal. If he thinks the place is barely holding together, he'll rush it. The massive doors of Bay 3 yawned open, spilling a faint trail of atmosphere into the void. Right on cue, the attacker's ship swung in, eager for a quick capture. Now, Lyra whispered. Elias hit the manual override for the docking arms. Ancient servos groaned, but the great metal clamps swung shut, slamming around the enemy vessel's hull. The attacker's thrusters flared in panic, but the arms held, locking him in place. The other 2 ships reacted instantly, breaking formation to close in. They're angry, Lyra said, her voice sharper now. Coming in hard, trying to flank. The one on your left is going to fire before he even has a lock. Helm, roll starboard now, Elias barked. The Resolute spun, enemy fire flashing past its port side so close it lit the hull in brief green light. Elias countered with a burst from the forward cannons, clipping the attacker's shields. The other one's about to target the station's reactor, Lyra warned. I swore under my breath. Tactical, make him rethink that. The Resolute surged forward, releasing a spread of mines between the attacker and the station. The enemy veered off, unwilling to risk the blast radius. With one ship trapped and the others scattered, Elias seized the moment. Target the clamps on Bay 3. Don't destroy them, just enough to break his hull integrity. The forward guns roared. The impact blew a ragged hole in the trapped ship's side, venting its atmosphere in a spray of debris. The pilot's escape pod fired, spinning away into the dark. The remaining mercenaries pulled back, deciding the fight wasn't worth the risk. Within minutes, their drives flared, retreating into the shadow of the asteroid belt. When the last hostile blip vanished from the sensors, Elias finally exhaled. He turned to Lyra. "You just turned the tide of that fight." She gave a faint, weary smile. "We turned it. You listened. That's rare." For a moment, the air between them felt charged, part adrenaline, part something neither wanted to name. "Next time," Elias said quietly, "we don't wait for them to come to us." Her eyes held his for a long second. "Next time," she agreed. Out beyond the station, the void was silent again. But this time, Elias knew it wouldn't last.
The station was quiet again, save for the distant hum of repair crews working aboard the Resolute. The mercenary ships were gone, scattered into the black, and the wreckage of the one they'd trapped still hung in the docking bay like a warning. Elias stood at the viewport in the control room, watching the debris spin slowly in the vacuum. The adrenaline of the battle had faded, leaving behind a deep, steady focus. Lyra's chair rolled up beside him. "They won't be back. At least, not those ones." "No," Elias agreed, "but the Baron will send others. This won't be the last time." Her expression was unreadable for a moment. Then she turned toward him, eyes steady. "You don't have to keep me with you. You could drop me at a neutral port, walk away, and be done with all of this." "I could," he said, "but I won't." Her brow furrowed slightly. "Why?" "Because you're not a burden," Elias said simply. "You're an ally, and I don't abandon allies." She studied him, as if weighing the truth of his words. Finally, her mouth curved into the smallest hint of a smile. "Most people would have seen me the way my father wanted them to, broken. You didn't. Maybe it's a human thing," Elias said. "We're stubborn about seeing people's potential." Lyra looked back out at the stars. "Then maybe humanity's stubbornness is exactly what this galaxy needs." Later, they stood together on the Resolute's bridge as the ship's drives came online, the soft vibration underfoot signaling readiness. The crew moved with quiet efficiency, but Elias felt their glances, respectful, curious, toward Lyra. Her role in their survival wasn't a secret. "Course set for the outer colonies," Helm reported. "Ready on your order, Commander." Elias nodded. "Take us out." As the stars stretched into lines, Lyra spoke without looking at him. "You know, my father will hear about what happened here, and when he does, he'll realize his joke didn't land the way he wanted." "Good," Elias said. "Let him. Maybe he'll think twice before underestimating a human again. And maybe," she added, "he'll realize he underestimated his own daughter." There was no bitterness in her tone this time, only quiet resolve. Hours later, when the ship had settled into its long cruise, Elias found her in the observation lounge. She sat with the galaxy spread before her, the arc of the Milky Way glowing faintly against the black. He stepped up beside her. "Are you thinking about what's next?" "A little," she said. "I've spent most of my life being told what I can't do. I think I'd like to spend the rest finding out exactly what I can." Elias smiled. "I was thinking the same thing." They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. The quiet between them was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the stillness of shared ground, of something built under fire and forged in trust. Somewhere far away, Baron Thrix might still think of her as a cruel joke at humanity's expense. But Elias knew better. So did she. And as the Resolute pushed deeper into the uncharted dark, carrying them toward whatever came next, the truth was simple.
They were no longer running from the Baron's game.